Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Brain Trainer podcast, AI for Social Impact. I'm Norman Valdez, and today we're excited to be joined by Dr. Ceyda Gormez. Ceyda is a postdoctoral researcher at the Indigenous Futures Research Cluster, working in the Abundant Intelligence Research Program. Her pioneering work in AI explores how human-machine relations go beyond the frameworks of control or instrumentality, offering new ways to engage with technology through creative and playful societies. Ceyda's research challenges conventional approaches to technology by examining machines as entities we can relate to and learn from in unexpected ways. In this episode, we dive into Ceyda's unique approach to AI, exploring the potential for indigenous perspectives to reshape our understanding of technology. We'll discuss the Abundant Technologies Initiative, which centers on community-driven designs for AI and considers machines as a kin. Through this lens, Ceyda shares how indigenous knowledge systems can offer a transformative path to creating technology that respects cultural and communal sovereignty, challenging the dominant narratives and practices in AI today. Join us for a conversation that reimagines technology as a site for collective growth, understanding, as we explore the intersection of AI, indigenous epistemologies, and the joy of rethinking human-machine relations. Hello, everybody, and welcome. We have another exciting episode for you. We have Ceyda Gormez, and we are about to delve into the topic of indigenous and AI. Alex, get us started, please.
Ceyda, it's really a pleasure to have you join us today. I've been following Abundant Intelligences for probably at least the last 9-10 months, if not longer. And we always start off with trying to get an understanding of how you ended up in the position and with the focus area. So could you share a little bit more about your personal journey and what drew you into the field of AI, but specifically focus on indigenous knowledge and perspectives? Because it's such a unique path, especially how you're framing it. Was there a particular moment, influence, or experience that shifted you to wanting to focus on this work?
Yeah, I mean, so there's my kind of emerging story, and then there's Abundant Intelligence's own kind of trajectory. I'll start with mine, and then I'll elaborate on the Abint journey as well. Well, we call it Abint in our little circle as Abundant Intelligences. So I started my PhD working on artificial intelligence as a general topic. Of course, when I was young and naive, I was very enthused in how to conceive technology from a sociological standpoint. I'm a sociologist through and through since my bachelor's. But I was always interested in sociology from kind of unconventional spaces. My master's was on video games, massively multiplayer online role-playing games, especially, and kind of looking into the everyday reality dynamics there. So kind of conceiving of these virtual worlds as a space for genuine social interaction and connection. And this kind of gave me a mode for thinking about how can we sociologize spaces that are not conventionally thought as part of a sociological kind of sociological substance, really. And so that's how my journey into AI came to be. Of course, I was very kind of naive once again. I was thinking AI conversation is really about creating a new kind of consciousness, a new form of human or a new form of intelligence. And I was all for that kind of stuff. Only when I started studying, I've realized that is not the case at all. This is just, like mathematics and technology coming together, kind of mimicking or expressing in ways that are legible to humans, sure, and they do take the human roles, sure, but ultimately we're dealing with nothing of the human sort, not in its totality, at least. And I was really interested in the interactions with machines, interactions with technology, kind of thinking about technology as actors in themselves, really, social actors that can shape our social life, actually. There's a whole kind of theoretical baggage there that I'm not going to get into. I'm not going to bore you, hopefully. But all suffice to say that trying to see these technologies as not simply just tools for, like corporates use these things, military uses these things, and government has its own agenda. But what about the human? Like, what about the very interactive, very very everyday kind of experience we would have with these technologies was my question. And thinking through these things, actually, it was 2018, and I had started a research group back then, machine agencies at Milieu Institute at Concordia University. And machine agencies was again about creating a space in which we can cultivate different discourses that are not germane to the dominant conversation nowadays. And it was 2018-19 when the Montreal Ethics of AI Declaration was made, actually, by Yoshua Bengio and their entourage. And we realized we are not here to maybe give ethical guidelines, but we need to create a critical space, especially in Montreal, where, like Montreal is trying to become a major global AI hub, or it is in some certain ways. So the Montreal conversation could be very kind of positive and optimistic, and that's nice and well, but there is a whole critical spectrum also, right? So thinking about these things, creating space for different kind of conversation in Montreal, and then in 2018, this essay came out from MIT Journal for Design, I think, making kin with machines. So this was an essay by Jason Edward Lewis, Noelene Arista, Archer Pechawis, and Suzanne Kite, who wrote about AI from their own indigenous kind of cosmologies, perspectives, and epistemologies. And they were arguing that we can view machines as kin, and what does that imply? When we see machine or technology as kind of kin to us, what does that imply? So that was kind of their starting question. And I was intimately hooked. I'm like, I want to work with you guys. Let's do this. But back then, I was also on my own journey. They were on their own journey. But I guess, it was 2020 when I finally joined them to work on their future imaginary exercises, actually. So the future imaginaries is this conception. Of course, future imaginary is used kind of widely everywhere in text spaces and non-text spaces. In academia right now, the future studies is kind of it's buzzing, let's say. And the way that Jason formulates future imaginary is, how indigenous people, we usually think of them as kind of like tokens from the past, as relics from an like a world that has been some time, and there is no kind of future thinking in the indigenous communities because of all these images also of the culture, putting them in this kind of historical place like museums or something, right? So the future imaginary is a way to regain the power of the future for the indigenous communities themselves. So the future imaginary for Jason is a way for indigenous people to imagine themselves 7 years, 70 years, 700 years into the future. And conceiving themselves of using technologies that their communities or their own selves would, from this point, would think that they would need and would not find it in a market or in existing projects. So the future imaginary is both a way for peoples to vision themselves into a future and their own future, and to create kind of the tools for their sovereignty towards that path and towards that future. And of course, thinking about the indigenous AI stuff was also kind of gaining haste back then, 2019, 2021. Indigenous languages were used to create different sorts of language models. And abundant intelligences kind of came out of all these conversations around how do we envision ourselves into the future? How do we make sure that these indigenous AI initiatives are indeed for indigenous people and for the communities themselves? And also dealing with AI, working on AI, you quickly realize how tainted, how toxic the landscape is. I mean, your podcast is on this, so I don't need to explain to your audience. But also being enthused, so seeing these kind of epistemological problems, not even just ethical problems, right? Not just because, there are like bias issues and everything, and we need to find some ethical hack that we can then make these systems ethical. We knew this wasn't going to be possible. And for us, the question was really about the epistemology. How do you get your data? How do you know your data? How do you know the world? How do these models know the world? So these questions started interesting us, which brought us to a more foundational space, a more science space, right? And this big partnership kind of started taking shape. This was 2021, 22. We started writing and gathering people who were interested and who were still doing stellar work around these issues of using technology in different ways, or really doing AI research, neuroscience and AI research with an indigenous perspective, etc. So this was a kind of a concentration of all these kind of research interests. And abundant intelligences came out as a way to bridge together the AI research sciences and indigenous epistemologies and their own ways of knowing the world and ways of being in the world. Is this kind of a...
It's a great overview. Yeah, and thank you for that. And I wanted to zoom in because as I was, thinking about your work and going over your work, there was just a paper that's just published this month, which is still October, Understanding Intelligence, Placing AI with Indigenous Knowledge Framework. So as I said to you at the beginning, I'm Indigenous myself, and I did read the paper, and I'm very interested about what it's saying in terms of conversations that we've had before with Alex and with other people about, how this technology AI is being shaped by a few hands, and it's very concentrated on it's a Western perspective, and very much in line, and because I'm Indigenous myself, and I grew up with a lot of oral history. My mom used to be the one that would share me stories that she got passed down from grandmother and mother, etc. So I very much see the value of trying to tie in that aspect of things, which is very valuable. I just wanted to ask, just within, because this paper is very recent, and as something that is very recent is taking on previous understandings. What would you think? What would you say is the main takeaway that people can understand of what you are conveying about abandoning intelligence and your recent paper? What is the main takeaway you think from the paper of what are we saying in terms of the value of indigenous view in AI shaping?
Yeah, I mean, you brought it up, this whole like elite take on or the stronghold over the technologies themselves. The design is done by the corporates. The processes are handled by corporates. It's very much in this kind of Silicon Valley ivory tower. I'm gonna call that ivory tower now, and maybe not the academia. And yeah, of course, this and being an elite means you come from a certain kind of knowledge system, you come from a certain kind of environment, a certain kind of course, a power position too. So certain roles are not going to be visible when you're in that space, of course. And of course, the elite will not know how to how to create technologies that are for the people. The people would know how to build, what kind of technologies that they would need and they would want, right? And there is no real communication between these two worlds, right? The elite does its stuff, and people, we are just kind of critiquing or trying to find a space. And there is no space even for public conversation, let alone for community needs and interests that we would try to bring the technology design towards. So the abundant intelligences really comes in this space, and they're like, yeah, we have our own way of deciding what do we want in terms of inviting a new relationship, a new kin with the technology or otherwise into our own world, and can we go through these protocols in building these technologies and in inviting these technologies to our lives. So for us, of course, the ultimate path, the ultimate design that we bring in here is putting the community to the heart of the design process. And this doesn't mean that we are now coming up with a design process and then we're going into the community and we're going to say, hey, we have a design, and do you want to talk to us? Do you want to consult us on our design process? And then at the end, this technology is going to be well designed. That is not the path that we're trying to take. The path we're trying to take is more really starting from the community. So our research network is kind of instrumental here, because the researchers that we're working with are already people from the communities, or who have been involved within the communities, within their own communities, doing their research or otherwise. contributing to the conversation. So we are inviting, first of all, these specific actors who we know are already involved in their communities, and their ideas have shaped the very idea of abundant intelligences from the get-go, because we all sat down at the beginning, right? We were co-writing together. We hosted many sessions, just thinking together and writing together. And ultimately, of course, now, and as the research is now taking on, we're going to probably get into, there's all sorts of issues around data sovereignty, or even just getting the communities to think about their futures and the technologies that they might want. Trying to get the elders to really guide us and allow us to embark on this path, knowing that we are on the good path. So the indigenousness of the indigenous AI part to us is really not about dropping in and out, like I said, but it's really weaving the communities into the process. So this means this is not like indigenous AI, because indigeneity encompasses a multiplicity that is way too large. And like you said, Norman, you're from Peru. We have people from New Zealand, in Aotearoa, the Maori communities there. We have Hawaii, Kanaka Maoli communities there. And then Lakota peoples from another research lab we have in the US, and then in Canada. So there's a lot of indigenous, there's a lot of indigenous nations involved in the process. Like, we think of abundant intelligences as a very cross boundary, or to be done across bounds. So we're kind of going against, so this is very transdisciplinary endeavor. We're bringing in AI, we're bringing in social sciences, humanities, art is a big also aspect. And then we're also kind of moving beyond the traditional boundaries of the academia, right? Like, involving the communities, this kind of move against just keeping the knowledge within academia. We're crossing national boundaries, both in terms of nation states, but also in terms of indigenous nations. We're crossing continents. We're working over too many time zones. That's not easy. So when we say indigenous AI, we don't mean like this monolithic, yes, this is a way to do indigenous AI and this is how we should go about it. Rather, we're making a space for an abundance of intelligences to emerge. We're trying to carve that space in which different forms of intelligences and technologies that we can dabble with, that we can experiment with, that we can think with and exist with. So in that sense, it's abundant. And the intelligences part is also significant, I think, to be taken away from that paper, because looking into the intelligence research in its history and the foundings, intelligence research has been very much tainted with kind of racial configurations and eugenistic forms of thinking, really. Is intelligence really this? Is intelligence something that can be measured so we can hierarchize people and then say you are deemed worthy and you are not? Obviously, this is not the path that we're taking, but honestly, the current definitions of intelligence that are used in AI usually are kind of building on those notions of hierarchies between species, etc.
I think that part. I think just to like, I don't mean to cut you, but like that part about intelligence, something that I think there's some debate, right, about like whether or not like the intelligence that AI will give us is actually can be even called intelligence. We just having this debate with, well, not debate, but we're having this comment with Alex over the weekend about that. The kind of follow up I wanted to ask is in these pots that in the paper we're describing, right, the 4 pots, and you mentioned one of them. I wanted to ask, what are some of the shortcomings that you have come across just trying to bring all of these different groups together? Because even among indigenous, and I said, like, literally yesterday I was talking to somebody, a friend from Mexico who has some indigenous roots as well, and this coming weekend, the one coming, we have the Day of the Dead that is celebrated on November 1st, November 2nd. And then we were just comparing, our traditions, because in Peru, we also celebrate that time. We don't call it Day of the Dead, but there are some similarities just across indigenous groups. but there are also some differences. And so, and that's very interesting, I think, for us, because we are also trying to bring people together. That you say, like, we need to form community, we need to collaborate, we need to come together. What are some of the challenges or shortcomings that you have noticed in your work and your research when trying to bring different indigenous groups together, or trying to find some alignment, at least within the idea of AI or intelligence and all that? Like anything to share on that?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is finding alignment is pretty tough, and when we're dealing with such abundance. Uh, and I would say we are not trying to kind of, efface those differences and try to, come up with like a big unification. That's not the aim necessarily. But how can we exist in difference together would be more the question for us. Um, However, when I say this means, of course, there is space for conflict, because through that conflict, I think we can only reach, of course, both the resolution, but also find different forms in which we can approach certain problems. Right now, for us, the issue is not really like, having too many different indigenous nations. That's really not an alignment issue at all, which is actually interesting. I like kind of maybe it's a bit of a tangent, but when we were getting kind of applying for the grants, and the grants, the juries are giving us feedback, and they were like, "Oh my God, you have so many indigenous nations. How are you going to get these people to talk to each other even?" And we were like, there's so much history, conflict, etc. And we're like, yeah, but when there's like a French and a German and a Brit in the same group, no one asks those historical differences. And their historical differences actually led to wars. Like, I think there would be a bit more, I would be more wary of aligning those, right? But in any case, the indigenous nations weren't very hard to bring around. But right now, to me at least, the big kind of divide is in between sciences as such, that we call, like the hard sciences, and their histories and their perspectives, which have been very harmful and very kind of, exploitative of indigenous peoples. There's a big violent colonial history there, on top of which sciences, the current contemporary sciences, find themselves on. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but it will come back.
That's okay.
Uh,
So,
yeah,
so, so
so the bringing together, so there is the sciences with its own violent history, and then indigenous people not having the space, or even now, even the confidence to enter these spaces. So of course, so for instance, right now we're running a speaker series where our researchers are talking about their own approaches to knowledge. It's a bit kind of philosophical, kind of getting them to reflect on how they view their own knowledge making processes. And the conversations there can get a bit conflictual, of course, because sometimes, the sciences has terminologies that use still those colonial meanings, such as like discover or explore. Like these terms can become very triggering for peoples who have heard these terms as a way to perpetrate violence onto their people, right? We're discovering, and this is all for science, all that kind of talk. Yeah, so trying to bridge that is I think going to be both like a big breakthrough for kind of bringing in indigenous forms of knowledge into the academic sphere. But also, this is a conversation that is very tough to have if you do not have trusted actors with you, actually, right? Because you don't know, you can bring in a scientist and they're going to maybe like steal the knowledge and run away and do their own stuff. It happens so many times, right? So we are trying to create a space through relying on the charitability of our actors, actually, right now. So when an AI scientist comes and says, over, like, I love building knowledge because I want to explore the world, or I want to discover new forms of knowledge, then that turns into another conversation about how those terms have had their colonial baggage. So how do you but this does not mean necessarily that the person that brought in this conversation necessarily endorses that, but this doesn't refrain us from having that conversation either, right? So these kinds of, so this is a big, I think this would be the biggest challenge in and this is, yeah, I mean, the academia in general with its exclusivity in any case is very tough to crack in these conversations. But we are, like I said, working with also people with so much deep expertise. Like we're working with people like Linda Smith, who literally wrote a book on indigenous methodologies and decolonial methodologies. These people know how to have those conversations, and they know how to bring in people into the alignment. So we're kind of relying on the, again, the elders' guidance, I guess, to forge this path for us.
I want to draw in there's several interrelated aspects that you've talked about. Our audience is obviously focused on nonprofit social impact philanthropy, which we're seeing as if Canada is going to be a leader internationally in the AI space. Aside from AI research itself, it's within. We're not going to be a leader in the venture space after the U.S. and China. We're not going to, on the regulatory side, we're falling behind. It's if we're going to be a leader within responsible AI or AI for social impact, this is the strength. It's the diversity. It's really the insights that you were talking about to our audience that many of who don't see themselves in current technology. Like you said, it's developed by the ivory towers in Silicon Valley, in Toronto, and so forth. A lot of the people that we are talking to are hesitant to engage with AI because of the narrative of existing technology. So how would you say to them, what would you say to them to make them more likely to engage? And I've always loved the pod system, that the methodology that you've adopted, because it has deep community roots from a diverse aspect, and you kind of bringing them together in really beautiful ways. And I want to just draw that challenge and the need to create spaces that you've been talking about now. How do we get more people, and not just Indigenous, but how can this be a beacon for other marginalized and underrepresented communities that don't see themselves current in technology to be an invitation in? How do we do that more often?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing to say is just because these technologies are kind of dangerous, or they have some kind of darkness around them, it's not, and the elite is making them, it's not going to make them stop from building these technologies. These technologies are getting built. They're going to be get built. There's every now and then, calls for decomputerization, or let's not use machine vision, these kinds of calls. And I understand facial recognition is a completely racist technology, right? Like, of course, I understand the impulse there. But these technologies are going to get built. And the only way that we can trouble this is if we go into those spaces and we infest those spaces and we create our own technologies with those tools. One of our community organizations, Tehiku Media from New Zealand, they built this Maori speech synthesis app, and it's one of the best performing apps on Maori language. Well, I think it's literally the best. And the way they built the technology, anyway, I can get into it later perhaps, but what one of the founders, Keone Mahalona, was saying was, we are now using the colonizers' technology, and we're turning their weapons against them because we have to, because if otherwise we're gonna be without weapons, and we're still in a war. So that kind of stuck with me, like in kind of emphasizing how people need to actually get into these spaces, and also not just because these technologies are so dangerous. Oh no, like, we need to do like some serious, and yeah, there needs to be serious and like very unwavering work. But but we're also trying to bring in kind of joy of science, joy of making knowledge, joy of building technology. Like me, I'm working in technology as a sociologist because I couldn't become an engineer, basically, right? Like my family thought I was a woman, so I cannot, so it's fine. But I'm still dealing with this because since I was a kid, I was so enthused about it. I was always into technologies, breaking apart, making things. There is a joy there. There's some things of the rhythms of the machines that one can find themselves in, and this experience is not something that we should let go. I think this is something that we can use to motivate us and to enter these spaces and to find and build technologies that we do want, and not just because some other person thought is the best technology to build or ever. But the big puzzle here is, of course, we cannot just say, yeah, let's be joyful and go into the spaces, like who, what, where, when. Capital also is another question, but capacity building for us is a big part of the puzzle in that regard. Indigenous people aren't in these spaces mainly because they don't have access to the tools and resources with which they could engage in these conversations. So a big part of our grant structure is actually devoted to building a student body, a trainer body, to build, to develop high quality personnel. Is that how the Canadian landscape calls it? So these indigenous HQPs, we see kind of like, like a new generation of indigenous AI scientists released into the world after our 6 years of program. And then those people go into the spaces, go into the tech spaces, and they create the technologies. And that's how we can actually achieve the change. And the pods, you brought it in, that's where all this kind of activity actually happens. So the pods, for your listeners, are kind of research labs. You can think of these spaces as these are usually media labs, so they're kind of creative spaces where the community comes in, have their kind of both in terms of getting training and education. So we are running like the pods around their workshop series, their open houses, community open houses. They invite their community's elders for, like discussing the topics amongst themselves. So the pods in our research group are very independent. They launch their own strategy. They launch their own also data protection and data governance strategies and policies. And these are kind of mixed method spaces. So maybe one day people are coming together for an art project, and then another, maybe they're running a focus group, and then another, they're building a technology together. So these are the spaces where we're trying to kind of break away from that notion that AI is so bad and it's going to kill us, and we should just, try to ban these things or regulate these things, or what we should regulate anyways, but, we should just try to, package them up and we shouldn't deal with them. But that's not going to be the case at all. We are going to be dealing with them. We are already dealing with them. We are already at the receiving end of a lot of the asymmetric power structures that these technologies leverage. So I think the only way for us is through and not around. And that's why we need to engage with AI, and in a meaningful way, not just as critical kind of. The critique is also hiding in another ivory tower. That's another issue, I think. The critique is always coming from another sort of elite who are following, who are then kind of, they're not necessarily feeding into the fear mongering, but there is a coincision there, where then people are thinking, yeah, then we should just ban these technologies, and good luck with that. I think, yes, sure. I mean, if you can, but also why not build our own technologies? That's to me is more exciting and interesting.
I just want to follow up with a quick reflection, because I love the consideration for creating spaces to imagine together, and what you said, that there is joy there, especially if we collectively come together. And we talk often about the imaginary crisis based on Jeff Mulligan's writing around, there's an imaginary crisis, we can't see past all the issues. So creating spaces, and I think that in your May paper, which we will provide a link for, there's talk about how do we work with technology. And I think this beautiful symmetry with working with technology, and not just human technology, but collective human imagination, through creating these spaces that then work together, is a really beautiful way to approach it, an important way to approach it.
Yeah, because in the collectivity, protocols emerge, right? We start negotiating, we start finding meaning. I mean, I'm a sociologist, so to me, everything happens through collectives. It's my bias. in sociology we talk about the collective effervescence. That's like a different kind of substance emerges almost when we get together, and that's the root of social change. Sometimes this is coming from Durkheim. And to us, we are relying on that kind of collective boundary making, knowledge making, negotiating, and that's where the cultural protocols emerge, like I said. And the technologies are already built with cultural protocols, only those protocols are not necessarily, specified, or we don't know, or the cultural protocol is actually to go to Kenya and make those workers there moderate your own kind of dark content, and then there is a mental health epidemic in global south because people are trying to moderate porn content or dangerous content or anything of the sort. So the cultural protocol, so then the cultural product, the cultural technology we end up with, of course, is this kind of abstracted weird entity that cannot speak other than this kind of very clean, very like neat form of a kind of corporate speak almost. So yeah, again, like you said, yeah, relying on the power of collectivity, I'm gonna say, but that's not necessarily what I mean. But yeah, relying on that kind of negotiating power of the community and the collectivity to rethink the technologies themselves. But this doesn't mean that collectivity doesn't mean that there is no like this is like leaderlessness. It doesn't imply that either. I think there is this collective work is also ushered by the leaders in this space.
I'm gonna post this scenario here, a question. So one of the things I've been seeing just overall my own professional experience working in nonprofits is that whenever you want to institute a change or propose a change that is outside of the norm, right? And I feel like I think we all agree that when we're talking about the current landscape of AI innovation and development, we already said it's a handful, only a few are leading it. There's a lot of people that are getting on the sidelines, right? Marginalized groups like Indigenous, etc. But in the realm of AI innovation, I think sometimes it's very necessary to overlap in anything that you suggest. What is the economic value of the thing that you're trying to do, right? So for example, I'm Indigenous, so advocating for Indigenous worldview, adapting to Indigenous practices, like for example, being stewards of the land, like adopting sustainable practices. And I say this because over the weekend I just finished a paper about an article about the environmental impact of and so adopting sustainable practices when scaling up AI, it's of course a very good idea. And actually, when you think about it, if you do the math, it would actually be better returns if you're just thinking about the bottom line. But I feel like, I don't know if you would agree or not, but I feel because we live in this reality of it's a capitalist society we live in, unless you bring an economic value to anything that you suggest, and if you're saying like we need to include, among different marginalized groups in the Indigenous perspective, as we need to include other perspectives, like for example, another group that comes to mind is the neurodiversity. We need to include neurodiverse perspectives because neurodiverse people, in sort of a similar way, can experience the world differently than what we think of other people. Has there been any thought about this aspect of the economic value? Because I feel like sometimes when you propose something, unless you make that connection of the money, like sometimes it just feels like there's lots of pushback if you don't do that.
Yes, I mean, this is kind of tricky in the sense that like what's the return on investment on a lot of the AI projects is a question I think anyway, economists would be better to answer in any case. And then the relationship between science and money is also another thing. I mean, you can invest money in the science, but I don't know how much return you can expect in a kind of a tangible and short-term way. But for us, the economic impact, we had to also outline kind of our economic impact And to us, this whole capacity building itself has kind of an economic growth inbuilt in itself, because we are building those capacities, and these people will go into the world and they're going to be creating their own capital, hopefully. And this is kind of, we saw this project also contributing to the indigenous businesses, indigenous peoples, their own economic kind of gauge and their economic capacity. So this was kind of so this is what we were focusing on, kind of, creating an economic kind of opportunity for the marginalized groups that didn't have the chance. But this is kind of more built in. But I think what you mean is more when you build a technology and then you want to make money off of it. If that's what you're getting at, is that what you are getting at? Because that's, like I said, we are working in a fundamental kind of level. We are really working with like epistemologies. How do we know what we know when it comes to AI, or trying to experiment with methodologies, or doing these futuring exercises to build our kind of guidelines, to build the technology, etc. This economic impact of these is not measurable as such, I don't think. But that's why this is a science program, and this is not a corporate program as such.
Yeah, I think when you say capacity building, I think that already should be something, because definitely even before AI, at least in Canada, indigenous communities very marginalized, right? Hardly have access to even electricity, like internet speeds. If you're saying that we're gonna shape it in a way that you will feel more included, and therefore it will proactively make you wanna use it more, then I think it could enable them, as you said, to be more active participants in the economy.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think we're coming to a close, and I'll have another question, and then Norman will tie us up. But in I just want to really relate it back to some of the aspects that you were talking about now. And first of all, I think that there is longer term, if you're looking at the conversations you're having, they have direct influence in terms of inclusionary innovation, economics, and so forth. There's some wonderful writing around Indigenomics by Carol Ann Hilton that shows that correlation, that if you're purely looking at economics, having inclusionary innovation, and in this case AI space, is directly tied to beneficial economics. If you're looking at that, but I want to ask about, this is an opportunity to disrupt technology in positive ways, and I feel like we have this is a moment in time to look at power dynamics, transforming systems, looking at how can we tackle things like digital equity, which is prevailing in a very real and practical way, not only here in Canada, where I, for instance, work with Indigenous communities facing the digital divide here, but also internationally. But it's a chance to disrupt and look at data sovereignty, education that's not conducive to tackle current technology and social media. When you have other communities that are interested in looking at the models that you are, and also collaborating with you, are you already thinking about, you've started with 4 pods, how can we be beneficial to a larger number, not only within Indigenous communities, but because we're facing similar aspects in refugees, newcomers, in Black communities in Canada as well as abroad, how can we think about not only replicating but working with the work that you're doing already?
Yeah, data sovereignty is definitely a big part of the work that we're doing, and we didn't set out to kind of, make this part of a big part of the project, but it ended up being, because AI is data, right? And AI is just matching data in different ways. And data sovereignty obviously is a big piece when you're coming from a marginalized community, and when your rights and when your data rights especially are usually eschewed. And the way that we deal, but then, like you said, there's so many different communities. How can we just gather all of that under one big umbrella? That's very tough. There are big frameworks out there already. There is First Nations principles of OCAP. There is also FAIR and CARE. These are more kind of coming from the AI space, really. These kind of data, and our Maori colleagues have principles of Maori data sovereignty, which is my favorite actually of the frameworks. They lay out just 10 principles. The way that we approach the data sovereignty question then turned out to be, because we are forming, of course, we are trying to unify the institutions so that we can work together. So we're forming research collaboration agreements, which have we are trying to build in some data sovereignty principles in there. But ultimately, the data protection will rely on the pods themselves, and the pods will formulate their own data sovereignty principles. Of course, we give them the tools and the resources with which to, or the examples with which to tackle this. So we're kind of envisioning a multi-scalar type of like sovereignty system almost. We have an overarching kind of agreement that protects all data, but that's more binding for the university type big institutions. And then at the community level, we have another operating sovereignty principles or agreements that is more kind of, that's not jargon, that's not like legal jargon. Like those big agreements are also kind of tough to deal with without a lawyer. So these are kind of understandable by the layman, and it lays out the stakes and lays out the currencies, and also giving people a chance for them to also like contribute what is really meaningful and something that they want to protect, giving them a chance to define that and then really try to put the rail guards there. But how I'm seeing it, this is a research project. This is not a project that has like ready-made kind of formulas to be sent off. Rather, we are approaching this as a research question, and this means at the end of 6 years, hopefully. So we were started in 2023. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned that. At the end of 6 years, we want to come up with a more formulaic principles of data sovereignty type of documentation that can help other communities to also find their ways. But I think, again, ultimately, of course, these are very important. Even EU AI Act is important, even though how problematic it is and everything, because they give us kind of frameworks with which we can then formulate our own kind of coming into the issue. Thinking of them as really guidelines and safeguards against legal systems, against predation of the market. But again, not really relying on these as like a one-trick pony solution to all the data problems that we have, because these are changing, like world is changing and the legal structures also are changing. So we need to be kind of on our toes and be vigilant in coming up with our own forms of protections for our own data.
So we're just closing now. Just can I give you the last word to say anything that you think our listeners should want to know as a takeaway in terms of the relationship between AI and indigenous knowledge systems? And then I was gonna ask you about like what next, because you kind of said like in 6 years you have some plan about your research project, but any long-term project or follow-up, either is from abundant intelligence project, anything future that you're looking forward to that you could share, and also like I said, anything that you would like to say as closing to our audience in terms of the work you're doing, AI, indigenous knowledge systems.
I think I would say, I think to me, this whole AI question became about viewing these technologies as already cultured. So now we're making the case for like a cultural AI or AI as culture. And they are already culture, and they are already cultured. And the conflicts and the contradictions that we're experiencing through the technology is kind of building on those cultural inheritances that they get from their design spaces and their design networks. So that means that we can be intentional about the cultures with which we cultivate these technologies. Then we can kind of decide on the cultural protocols with which we handle, design the technologies that we live with every day. They are on the background kind of doing their stuff, right? Like we want them to be culturally appropriate. And honestly, I'm thinking like the abundant intelligence is, I think, unique and special because it brings people to the fore. Like I think, for instance, responsible AI, etc., like these are similar efforts, but they are very different in that they are bringing in these kind of concepts of responsible AI. I'm like, who is responsible for whom? What does that mean? Like, there's so many openness. But I think abundant intelligences is really giving the space in which to define and formulate. It's almost like it's almost an AI sandbox, really, where we can kind of dabble with and where we can experiment with. I think the economy thing that you brought in, Norman, the aspect was important, because maybe there is no space for people to experiment with technologies because of this kind of economic aspect too. So bringing in play, bringing in joy, and bringing in a renewed enthusiasm for technology, hopefully, is, I think, is what abundant intelligences will bring in the first 6 years, I think. And again, finding those models, methodological models to build good AI. That's going to be that's also our 6-year plan. And coming up with prototypes, really good prototypes for examples of indigenous AI is another goal that we have. And at the end of 6 years, so we call this our first 6 year. And at the end of 6 year, we are hoping to have even more labs and even more, hopefully, technologists working with us to explore new questions again in the space, because you solve one problem, there will be another problem. So kind of moving on with that, and continuing to keep a space for indigenous people, because we need these spaces currently, because otherwise there is no, in the dominant space, there is no space for us, really.
Yeah, I think once again, I love the work you've done, and I think with Alex and I and people that are working on this, facing a similar challenges, like that we working to advocate that nonprofits and philanthropy are not included in the table of AI development, innovation, or how it's being shaped. And so you've definitely have developed some a system, a project that takes care of the indigenous side. And I think we need to be doing what you're doing, and maybe what you do is a model that we can actually look after, Alex, and see maybe this is a way that we can actually solve our own issue. But there has to be more groups of people, and we need more people to be active citizens, because this is a big undertaking. It's an inflection point. I mean, potentially December we might be getting GPT-5, supposed to be 100 times greater than GPT-4. So yeah, we're going through the big things, and so we need more people to be participants and to be shaping this technology. Alice, one last reflection. Yes.
Yeah, and because you just mentioned it at the end of what you said, Jay, that we're making a new table. I love that, because both in terms of a new culture, but really it's not the existing table we're asking for a seat at. It's really defining a new table and create. I love that.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. Thank you so much.
Yes, we could be talking a lot more, but
yes, I have so many.
We're gonna close it up. But I think we will have you back to continue this conversation and explore further this topic. But yeah, I want to thank you again for joining us, for having this conversation with us. And yeah, we will share any links, your paper that just came out. And yeah, to the listeners, thank you for listening. And yeah, follow us, share this podcast, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye.